In 2022, a single Instagram post from one woman generated more impressions for a French luxury house than that brand's entire paid advertising budget for the previous quarter. No agency bought that reach. No algorithm manufactured it. It arrived because 100 million people, spread across North America, Europe, Southeast Asia, and beyond, were watching her. Her name is Lalisa Manobal. You may know her simply as Lisa. But the luxury industry knows her as something more specific, the single most commercially potent fashion ambassador of her generation. At an age when most people are still paying off student loans, she had already reshaped the customer demographics of 4 of the world's most powerful brands. This is the story of how that happened, and what it tells us about where luxury is actually going. Part 1. The problem luxury didn't know it had. By 2018, the global luxury goods market had a structural problem, and almost nobody on the inside was willing to say it out loud. The industry had spent decades engineering prestige around a very specific image: European heritage, Western aspiration, and a customer base that was largely white, largely middle-aged, and largely concentrated in a handful of major cities. Paris, Milan, New York, London. This image was built over generations, and it worked until it didn't. Because by 2018, McKinsey and Bain were both publishing reports telling the same uncomfortable story. The growth in global luxury spending wasn't coming from Europe. It wasn't coming from North America. It was coming from Asia, and specifically from a generation of young Asian consumers who were not waiting for Western gatekeepers to define what luxury meant to them. Chinese consumers alone were projected to account for nearly 40% of global luxury spending by 2025. But the brands selling to them were still leading with faces that looked nothing like them. Still casting campaigns that felt, at best, like invitations addressed to someone else. Into this moment, this slow-motion identity crisis inside the industry, stepped a Thai dancer who had moved to Seoul at 14, trained for years in near-total obscurity, and then detonated onto the global stage as a member of BLACKPINK. Lisa didn't just endorse luxury brands. She rewired who luxury brands think their customer is. And no single deal tells that story better than the one she signed with Celine. Part 2. Celine, the bet that changed everything. Of all the brand relationships in Lisa's portfolio, Celine is the one that matters most. Not just because it was the longest or the most visible, but because it was the most philosophically significant. When Hedi Slimane took over Celine as artistic director in 2018, he made a deliberate choice to strip the brand back. Out went the maximalist aesthetic of his predecessor. In came a pared-down rock and roll elegance, clean lines, leather, a certain aggressive cool. Slimane had done this before at Saint Laurent, and it had worked. But at Celine, he was working with a different proposition. He wasn't just redesigning clothes, he was redesigning who Celine was for. And then, in early 2019, Celine made an announcement that sent a quiet shockwave through the fashion industry. Lisa, not a French actress, not a legacy model, not a name from the traditional European glossy circuit, was being named a global brand ambassador. The French press was skeptical. Some corners of the fashion media didn't quite know what to make of it. But Slimane knew exactly what he was doing. At the time, Lisa had somewhere in the region of 20 million Instagram followers. That number would grow dramatically in the years that followed. But it wasn't purely the follower count that Celine was acquiring. It was the cultural positioning. Lisa's audience was young, global, aspirational, and, crucially, comprised of exactly the demographics that luxury brands were desperately trying to reach without knowing how to speak to. What happened next was measurable. Following Lisa's first Celine campaigns, searches for the brand surged in multiple Asian markets. Social listening data showed a significant uptick in organic Celine mentions from audiences in Thailand, South Korea, Japan, and the Philippines. Markets that Celine's traditional advertising had never effectively penetrated. But the more interesting story was what happened in Western markets. Because Lisa's audience is not monolithic. A significant percentage of her followers in the United States, the United Kingdom, and across Europe are not K-pop fans in any conventional sense. They are people who follow her because she has become, over time, a genuine cultural figure. A woman whose taste and presence carry weight entirely independent of the music industry that first introduced her to the world. When she wore Celine, those Western audiences paid attention too. The visual language of the campaigns was significant. Slimane shaped a creative approach that resulted in imagery feeling neither like traditional K-pop promotional material nor like conventional Western fashion advertising. It was something in between. Something new. a visual vocabulary designed for a customer who exists between cultures and is fluent in all of them. By 2023, Lisa and Celine had established what industry observers were calling one of the most successful ambassador relationships in contemporary luxury fashion. Not merely in terms of impressions, but in terms of brand heat, that intangible quality that makes a label feel culturally alive rather than merely expensive. The relationship had become a case study in the industry's most elite business schools. But Celine was only the beginning. Part 3. Bvlgari. When high jewelry found a new vocabulary. If Celine established Lisa as a fashion figure, Bvlgari announced something more specific. It positioned her at the very top of the luxury pyramid. High jewelry is a different world from ready-to-wear. The price points are different. We are talking about pieces that cost more than most people's homes. The marketing is different, quieter, more restrained, built on heritage and craftsmanship rather than cultural momentum. And the ambassadors have traditionally been different. Old Hollywood, old money, names that arrive with decades of cultural weight already attached. When Bvlgari named Lisa a brand ambassador, it was a signal to the entire industry. Not just that this woman was commercially powerful, but that the definition of the aspirational customer for ultra-high-end goods was fundamentally changing. Bvlgari, founded in Rome in 1884, is one of the world's oldest and most respected jewelry houses. Its Serpenti collection, the coiled snake motif that has become one of the most recognizable symbols in high jewelry, has been worn by icons from Elizabeth Taylor to Audrey Hepburn. The brand's heritage is impeccable. Its clientele, historically, does not advertise itself. So when Bvlgari brought Lisa to Rome to shoot campaign content in front of the Trevi Fountain, in the shadow of the Colosseum, something very deliberate was being communicated. The brand was not abandoning its heritage. It was saying, this heritage belongs to her too. And, by extension, to her audience. The Roman campaign imagery was striking precisely because of its intentionality. This was not a fast fashion shoot in a studio. It was Bvlgari taking its most storied iconography, the city of Rome itself, and placing Lisa at the center of it. The message to the global luxury market was unambiguous. This is what aspiration looks like now. The commercial logic was equally clear. Bvlgari's parent company, LVMH, the world's largest luxury conglomerate, had access to data showing where the growth in high jewelry spending was concentrated. Young, affluent consumers in Asia. Young, wealthy consumers in the diaspora communities of major Western cities. Precisely the audience that Lisa's cultural presence commanded. But there is a detail here that matters beyond the business case. Lisa's public engagement with high jewelry and the way she wore Bvlgari pieces as a natural extension of her personal aesthetic rather than a costume contributed to a broader shift in how a generation perceived fine jewelry. For younger audiences who had previously seen high jewelry as a relic of a different era, her wearing it made it feel like something to aspire to rather than inherit. That shift in perception is not something you can manufacture with a media budget. It requires someone with genuine cultural credibility. And credibility in the luxury world is not for sale. It has to be earned. The question the industry was now asking was, how far could that credibility stretch? Into mass market? Into sport? The answer surprised almost everyone. Part 4. Nike, the wild card that makes perfect sense. Here is where the story gets genuinely interesting. Because every brand relationship we have discussed so far fits a certain narrative. Celine, ultra-cool French fashion house, bets on global reach. Bvlgari, storied Roman jeweler, positions itself for a new generation of wealth. The through line is luxury. The through line is prestige. And then there is Nike. Nike, for context, is the largest athletic apparel company on Earth. Its annual revenue is measured in the tens of billions. Its brand is genuinely global in a way that almost no other company in any sector can claim. It is also, self-evidently, not a luxury brand. So when Lisa partnered with Nike, the fashion industry had to reconcile something that, on paper, looks like a contradiction. It isn't. What Nike and Bvlgari have in common within Lisa's portfolio is not price point. It's cultural authority. Nike's authority is different from Bvlgari's. It lives in sport, in streetwear, in the democratic idea that performance and style belong to everyone. But it is authority, nonetheless. And in a personal brand portfolio, authority compounds. What Lisa's Nike partnership demonstrated, and this is the detail that analysts tend to underestimate, is the breadth of her cultural fluency. She is equally credible in a Bvlgari high jewelry campaign as she is in Nike sportswear. That range is extraordinarily rare. Most celebrities occupy one lane. They are either high fashion or mass market. either aspirational or accessible. Lisa operates in both registers simultaneously, without the contradiction feeling forced or calculated. For Nike, the commercial value is obvious. Access to Lisa's audience, which skews young, female, and highly engaged, in markets where Nike's growth agenda is most aggressive. Southeast Asia. East Asia. The Korean wave diaspora that has seeded K-pop fandoms across Europe and the Americas, creating millions of new consumer touchpoints that no traditional advertising strategy had previously mapped. But for Lisa, the Nike relationship does something equally important on the personal brand side. It prevents her from being categorized as a purely luxury figure. It keeps her connected to the version of her audience that cannot afford Bvlgari earrings but can absolutely save up for a pair of Nike Air Force 1 second. It keeps her aspirational at every income level simultaneously. That is sophisticated brand architecture. Whether it emerged from calculation or instinct, the result is the same. A portfolio that is simultaneously premium and accessible, exclusive and democratic. The kind of apparent contradiction that, when it works, makes a personal brand genuinely irreplaceable. And there is one final point worth making here about Nike specifically. A company that has built its entire identity on being exactly where culture is, had identified the same center of gravity that the luxury houses had. Not Los Angeles. Not London. The center had shifted. And Nike, like Celine before it, had followed it directly to her. Part 5. Louis Vuitton. The complicated chapter. Now we arrive at the most nuanced section of this story. Louis Vuitton, the flagship of the LVMH empire, one of the most financially successful luxury brands in human history, and its relationship with Lisa is a chapter that requires precision. Because the full picture here is still in motion, and part of the story is precisely that motion itself. What is well documented, Lisa attended Louis Vuitton runway shows during her time with BLACKPINK. And there was a period of visible association between her and the house, the kind of front-row placement and strategic proximity that signals an ongoing, if informal, relationship. Louis Vuitton under NikeSKIMS had been deliberately cultivating connections with K-pop's biggest artists, understanding, earlier than most Western luxury houses, that the cultural capital of the Korean wave was real, durable, and commercially significant. What is less defined is the formal status of any relationship in the context of her departure from YG Entertainment in 2023, and the evolution of her fully independent career since. Brand ambassador contracts in luxury fashion are privately negotiated and rarely announced. Updates to those contracts, renewals, transitions, conclusions, are even more rarely disclosed. What we can say analytically is this: the major LVMH houses, Louis Vuitton, Dior, Celine itself, have been in active, expensive competition for exactly the tier of ambassador that Lisa represents. The conglomerate that owns Bvlgari is the same conglomerate that owns Louis Vuitton. Within the LVMH ecosystem, Lisa's commercial value is understood at the highest strategic levels. And this is the broader point that the Louis Vuitton chapter illuminates, even if the specifics remain private. There is a reason why the world's most powerful luxury groups have been maneuvering, quietly, carefully, at significant cost, to secure relationships with a small number of artists from the Korean entertainment industry. It is not goodwill. It is not cultural curiosity. It is the recognition that these artists have done something no advertising campaign and no Western celebrity has been able to replicate. They have built genuine, organic, passionately loyal audiences across every major consumer market on Earth simultaneously. Louis Vuitton spent over a century building a global brand. Lisa built a comparably global audience in less than a decade. When the fashion industry looks at those two data points side by side, the commercial logic of partnership becomes obvious. The specific chapter between Lisa and Louis Vuitton may still be unresolved in its formal detail. But the story it belongs to, the story of how luxury's most powerful players are recalibrating their entire ambassador strategy around a new kind of global star, that story is very much in progress. And it has a name. It has a thesis. It has a face. Part 6. The architecture of an empire. Here is what often gets lost when people discuss Lisa's brand portfolio. The individual deals are impressive. The Celine campaigns are visually striking. The Bvlgari imagery is iconic. The Nike partnership is commercially astute. But what is truly significant is how they fit together. Because this is not a random collection of endorsements assembled by an agent filling a calendar. This is a coherent portfolio with a recognizable internal logic. Consider the range. Celine sits at the intersection of high fashion and cultural cool. Bvlgari occupies the absolute peak of the luxury pyramid. Nike anchors the democratic foundation. Mass market, global, deeply connected to sport and youth culture. Between these three poles, Lisa's personal brand covers the full spectrum of consumer aspiration. She is aspirational to a 19-year-old in Manila who will save for months to buy a pair of Nikes because Lisa wore them. She is aspirational to a 35-year-old professional in Singapore selecting her first luxury handbag and wanting it to feel culturally current, not merely expensive. She is aspirational to a collector in Beverly Hills, eyeing the Bvlgari Serpenti piece that Lisa wore at a campaign event in Rome. Three completely different customers. Three entirely different price points. One person at the center of all of it. This is not normal. Brand portfolios are not supposed to look like this. The conventional wisdom in the luxury industry has long held that prestige brands demand exclusivity from their ambassadors. The logic being that adjacency to mass market goods dilutes the prestige of the jewelry house, the fashion label, the heritage brand. Except that conventional wisdom was built for a different world. It was built for a world in which luxury's customer base was geographically concentrated and culturally homogeneous. In the world that actually exists, in which a young woman from Buriram, Thailand can become one of the most commercially influential people in global fashion, the old rules are not just optional. They are obsolete. Lisa's portfolio is not an exception to the rule. It is evidence that the rule no longer applies. We are not at the end of this story. We are somewhere near the beginning of its most interesting chapter. In 2023, Lisa did something that no other artist in the Korean entertainment industry had done at scale. She left YG Entertainment, the management giant that had controlled BLACKPINK's commercial relationships for over a decade, and founded her own company. LLOUD, her independent label and management entity, represents a structural shift in how she operates and, by extension, in how her brand relationships function. What that means for her portfolio is still unfolding. But the direction of travel is visible. An artist who controls her own commercial relationships does not merely receive deals from brands. She selects them. She negotiates from a position of genuine leverage. She can decline partnerships that don't align with the positioning she is building. She can pursue categories, film, music, live performance, even fashion creation, in ways that a traditional management structure might have constrained. Her distribution deal with RCA Records brought the infrastructure of Sony Music to her solo career. Her acting debut in HBO's The White Lotus Season 3 introduced her to an entirely new audience demographic, one that is older, more premium, and accustomed to prestige television rather than pop music. Her performance at the FIFA World Cup 2026 opening ceremony placed her in front of one of the largest global audiences in the history of live events. Each of these moves expands the perimeter of her cultural footprint. And with each expansion, her value to the brands currently in her portfolio, and every future brand considering entering it, increases. The luxury industry spent decades trying to manufacture the kind of global cultural authority that Lisa has built organically. They funded campaigns, hired consultants, commissioned entire Asia-Pacific market strategies. And then they watched as a generation of artists from Seoul, and one artist in particular, achieved in years what they had failed to achieve in decades. The brands that understood this earliest are the ones sitting closest to her now. The ones that hesitated are the ones still calculating how to catch up. There is a version of this story that treats Lisa purely as a commercial phenomenon, a product of smart management, extraordinary timing, and undeniable talent. That version is accurate but incomplete. The more complete version acknowledges something harder to quantify. That what Lisa represents to the luxury industry and to the culture at large is a fundamental realignment of who gets to be aspirational. Who gets to stand in front of the Trevi fountain wearing someone else's most precious jewels and make them feel, to a generation watching on their phones, like the most natural thing in the world. For most of fashion history, that position at the center belonged to a very specific set of faces, from a very specific set of places. What Lisa's brand portfolio represents, what Celine and Bvlgari and Nike have collectively bet on, is that the center has moved, and she's standing in it.